So, anyone who comes to the vlog, never used video on it before, got a GoPro recently to try it out. You can see nice sunset here behind me, Mountain Rush. It's not what I'm shooting though. Got a nice foreground in front of us out here, gonna try some long exposures, see how we get on. So for this one, I'm gonna add a couple of filters, probably gonna use a Grad ND, take down the sky a little bit, probably 10 stop, maybe 6 stop. See how we get on with the times. Got some nice reflections here in the water in front of me. There's a nice sunset behind me, as you can see, but not shooting that at the moment. Not looking out to have the sunset where we want it, but I've still got some nice colours in the sky. So I'll turn you around and you can see exactly what I'm about to shoot. So this is the view I have in front of me. Hopefully you've got good sound. I'm not sure what it'll be like with the wind here. As you can see, got a nice sky in front of me, some reflections in the water. So as I go through, as you can see, at the moment they're just lining up. I'm going to take a test exposure. So I'm going to get my settings dialed in, down at 100 ISO. And I'm just going to fire on the timer, see how this turns out before I take everything out of the bag. Okay, so we've got foreground is a little dark, sky is a little bright. So I'm just going to go across to the bag and I'm going to get out my Grads and the Lee holder. So I'm going to take this lens hood off. So this is a little experiment with the GoPro. Only got it recently enough, and hopefully I'm going to start using it to make some videos for the blog and use it for some time lapses. So I'm going to start off with the Lee holder. One problem I always have with 24-7 is it's not very easy to screw in filters or adapter rings a lot of the time. It's kind of tricky to get it on the right thread. One thing I have seen is a little adapter from, I think it's 3D printers. If I can find it, I'll put the link up in the video. And they have a nifty little adapter that goes on in place of the lens hood, so it actually attaches here. The only problem is I see it for a lot of lenses, but I don't think they have one. Well, don't know if they have one, but I don't know how they could do it with the 24-70, because the barrel actually extends in and out of the lens as it zooms. So I can only see it working on lenses that don't have an extended front barrel, so it'll be able to sit on the lens hood and the filters go in front. They are quite handy if you have a lens that doesn't do this. It's a little wet here. You can probably hear me stepping through the water. Standing about 2 feet of water here trying to get this shot, but whatever it takes. So I'm going to put this Grad in place. I always set up the Grad before I put the big stopper in, because obviously it's going to be a little tricky if you have the big stopper in first. You won't know where to place the Grad, you won't be able to see. And if you check back to one of my first blog posts where I talk about filters, I'm going to close the viewfinder opening on the back of the camera to stop any light leaks. I'm just plugging in my timer. I'll have a look through and set up the Grad. About there. So I'm just going to try another shot with just the same settings, but with the Grad in place. That's helping an awful lot. You can see how much it's darkened down the sky. But because of what I've done, I started with a dark foreground Now I've matched my skies to the foreground, so I'm going to have to change my settings a little bit. I'm going to bring them, I was at a 15th of a second, I'm going to go to 1/3 of a second now. And take another shot and see how it looks. Much better. Still is a little bit of the grad coming down on the rocks on the top half a little, so I might adjust that, bring it up slightly, and try another shot. It's looking much better. Now one thing I do like to do is a lot of long exposures, so I'm going to try the big stopper next and see if we can get some movement in the clouds. And hopefully you can't see a whole lot of water out in the sea. It is actually only about 20 feet away from me, but with a wide angle it looks a fair distance. So I'm going to put on the big stopper to try and kill off a bit of the water. Oh, I had to go back to the bag. Big stopper is a little dirty. Get the lens pen out and give it a little bit of a clean. It's nothing worse than having to go through and remove dust spots constantly. There's one thing I have with the filters is they do attract an awful lot of dust, so they nearly need to be cleaned every time you take them out of the bag. I'm going to drop that down. So my last exposure was at 1/3 of a second, so I'm going to open up my trusty app so I don't have to do all the maths. Got the long exposure calculator. But at the moment, when I put in my exposure was 1/3 of a second. With the 10-stop filter, it's actually giving me 5 minutes and 40 seconds, which is a little bit long. 10-stopper might be a little extreme for this, but we'll go with it. What I'm actually going to do is I might just take my ISO up to 200. So it won't really, I get a tiny bit more noise, but nothing noticeable. And then that will cut my exposure time in half, so instead of 5 and 40, I'll be able to go with just over 2.5 minutes or 2 minutes 45, so we'll try that. So I'm going to set my camera to bulb with this remote. The thing I like about these interval timer remotes is I can put in exactly the length of exposure I want, so I don't have to just use bulb mode, lock the remote in, and then count it on my phone or in my head, which I tend to forget to do. So I'm actually going to just try out. I do find with my 10-stopper, it tends to be a little dark, a little darker than what the exposure calculator usually ends up with. So I'm going to start at 3 minutes, and I'm going to start that exposure now. One little thing, forgot to put the camera in mirror up. I like to do mirror up, try and get as little movement as you can. So first fire is the mirror up, and then the second one I have a 5-second delay on the timer, and then it'll start taking the shot. So that shot turned out quite good. The only problem is never changed my white balance, so you do get a bit of a blue cast. So I'm going to change that up now, setting it up to 10,000 Kelvin. Works pretty well. And one of the other things I want to do is I'm actually going to drop it from 200 down to 100 and go the full 6 minutes, because I'm not getting a whole lot of movement in the sky that I'm happy with. So I'm just going to change that around and take another shot. This is one of the things I like about the interval timer, is I'm able to set in here. We'll just go to 6 minutes of an exposure. The delay is 5 seconds, so if I tap this button, sets the mirror up, then I press this, and when the 5 seconds goes, the shutter opens. So I'm just going to change everything down. The ISO needs to come down to 100. I'm just going to check that shot for sharpness, make sure everything's okay. Yep, it's all looking good. So I'm just going to fire this now, and we'll see how that turns out. There is one thing I keep meaning to do with my big stopper, is the case. The case is great on the big stopper. The only problem is this little foam bit in here. this little insert. I don't know why they don't glue them in at the factory, but I want to get some double-sided tape or some glue and stick this in, because you can see when you're out in a situation like this, it's a little bit windy and you just can't get the little thing in. It just becomes a little bit of a hassle. I've had to chase it a few times when it blows away. So there is one major problem I've noticed since that exposure, is the light is now falling badly. That my shadow is in the shot. Just on the right you can see the shadow of the camera and the tripod. So one of the things I'm going to have to do is zoom in slightly, which won't be such a bad thing. So I might have to change settings up a little bit quicker because we're losing the light fast. But here I just have the Tiffen polarizer. So that's going to go on for the lead holder. Make sure it's clean. So I have to dismantle everything to get this in. Try not to drop anything in all the water. So it's a little tricky when you're using filters like this, because now I have to put the Tiffen filter in and turn the polarizer to get the effect I want, and then try and mount the lead filter back on without turning the polarizer. So you can see how the lead polarizer will help big time and get these shots. Anything that speeds it up and gives you a little bit more time. So right now I'm at 24mm, so if I just zoom in slightly, I have to go to 28 or 29 here, just to get past the reflection or the shadows of the tripod. So have a look through it and see how the polarizer is doing. Okay, so there's a lot of glare in that water. Just there is cutting it down about the most. So with a lot of these filters, they'll have some sort of name printed on it, and the easiest way to do it is, you can see the Tiffen is right here. So if the Tiffen is here pointing back towards the camera, try and make sure it stays there. It's already moving. So then I need to put this holder down with 2 hands. Find something to put it down without scratching the glass. So that needs to come back to here. The other thing you can do is, if you just remember the spot it needs to be, you can just keep turning. Eventually when it gets tight enough, you can just use the adapter ring to move your polarizer. I know it was there. So grab the holder. So we put the holder back on. Now the only problem is, since I've moved this, I've probably moved the grad, so I'm going to pop the big stopper back out. Oh, the grad's in the wrong slot. I'm going to take the big stopper out and reposition the grad to make sure it's exactly where I want it in the shot. So now it's just coming down over the sky, and the big stopper goes back in. So the light is changing here quite a bit, and the last exposure was 6 minutes, so I'm actually going to step it up a little bit just to compensate for the light failing. So I'm going to put it at maybe 6.5 minutes. And close the viewfinder up, and we'll try that shot again. So first shot to put it into mirror up, and the second button to fire off the timer. So I just took another shot, and at 6.5 minutes it's turning out pretty dark. Sun's nearly set behind me, Yeah, that's one problem with the long exposures is at this time of day you lose the light really quick. I do want to go out and take a shot at those rocks where the waves are hitting them up in front, but what I'm going to do just to try and get an exposure here, I'm going to bring my ISO up to 200 to cut my time down, so that should take me down to around 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes, and then I'm going to take the aperture down another stop and I'm going to shoot a 3-minute exposure at those settings, so hopefully that gives me enough light. So that shot has turned out much better. Still could do it a little extra light, but the sun has just dropped below the horizon here, so I don't think I'm going to get enough light to do it unless I start taking the exposures a good bit shorter. What I do want to do before the light fades altogether, it's just up in front of us, I want to go around those rocks that are just sticking out into the water. I think they make a great long exposure, so I'm just going to move up forwards before this water gets too deep. So as you can see, light's nearly gone behind me, so up here I'll try and walk up. It's a little bit slushy here. Be a little too deep soon for me to walk back, so can't really spend too long up here. I'll end up getting caught by the tide coming in, and I don't fancy swimming back with my camera bag. So just up here is where I want to be. I'm just going to set the tripod down. Lock that in, make sure the legs are good and sturdy. Always want to make sure your tripod is locked down. I did lose a camera to a dodgy tripod before, so a little bit of paranoia coming in there. So right now I can't see anything, so I'm going to have to lift this grad up, and I'm just going to turn on the level in the camera, so it's better. Now let's see what we're like for composition here. So I'm going to have to raise the center column to get the composition in this shot the way I want it. Yeah, that's better. The only problem with raising the center column out is I have the added problem that it introduces some extra shake in the wind. The tripod isn't as sturdy, but do what we gotta do. So right now I'm gonna go with an exposure of, change my aperture actually, 5.6, and because I'm losing so much light, I'm gonna change quickly. I am pretty deep in water here at the moment. The tide is tide is actually coming in so quick, I probably will only get a chance for 1 or 2 shots. I'm going to throw the little stopper in so my exposure times can be a little bit shorter. So I'm going to take my ISO back down to 100, and water is nearly at the top of the wellies. Tide is rushing in pretty quick here. So I've changed this one down, so I'm only doing a shot at 1.5 minutes, and I've changed the aperture up a little bit, so hopefully this is right, because I really need to move out of here or I'll end up stranded. I'll be very wet going home. So I've still got, there we go, exposure's finished. Beautiful. Exposure is perfect. So right now, quickly grab the remote here and the tripod and escape this wave. Now try and find my footing to get back here, because I can't see what's in the water anymore, and there is a few deep spots along here. Oh, I just hit one. So I'll go up onto this rock. This is getting a little tricky. So I'm going to move up here and put the cameras back in the bag. GoPro is safe enough, but I don't really trust walking along here with the DA100 in my hand. Just make it back out, thankfully, without getting too wet. And you can see just what I missed on the other side, but unfortunately there wasn't any great vantage points from across there. Shoot. So that's pretty much everything. I'm kind of wrapped up here and ready to head back to the car. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Check out the shots. I'll have the final images all up on the website, so check out robkennedyphoto.com.